All right, thank you so much for the opportunity to present the FY24 year-end budget review this evening. I would first like to just send tremendous thanks to Michelle Kopic, our Director of Budget and Finance. She's not with us tonight because she's at home getting ready to go to Indiana, where her son and her daughter-in-law are going to have their second child. So if not tonight, tomorrow. So congratulations to Michelle's family for that new little one joining them, and thank you to Michelle for all of her hard work in terms of putting together this financial report and all of the work for the data throughout the year. So this evening, what I'm going to talk about is our final budget review for all three of our funds: the school operating fund, the food service fund, and our community services fund. All of the data in this report are as of June 30th, but it's still subject to the final audit. The auditors are here this week. We expect to see them at schools on Thursday. And then all of the comparisons in these charts are against the FY24 revised budget. In this report, just to give people kind of that framework, for every single fund, we start out with a summary chart. So on the screen for us right now is the summary chart for the school operating fund. Following the chart that's a summary chart, we provide a 3-year comparison chart for every fund. Then we have a written summary of all the narrative information that hopefully explains everything that I'm going through tonight. We'll have a chart that shows the impact of fund balance. And then at the end of the report, we provide a detailed report of all of the revenue and expenditures and their variance to budget based on that object level. And then at the very end of the report, I'm going to go through a list of one-time funding needs that potentially could be funded with fund balance. So in terms of the school operating fund, starting out, our operating revenue for FY24 totaled $63 million. When we look at that, I'm going to walk through the chart starting with the top line of other revenue. So the other revenue received is $1.3 million. That is $237,487 higher than budgeted. You can see that in the available column. So in revenue, all of those positives are revenue in excess of the budget. The negatives are below budget. And then that percent available shows that percentage. So over revenue overall was $237,487 higher than budgeted. That primarily occurred due to tuition receipts being $303,795 more than we had budgeted, and investment income being $235,577 more than budgeted. The excess revenue on both of those categories was offset by lower than budgeted revenue from rental student activity fees and miscellaneous financing. And for the first time in many years as I've been here, the revenue from school bus arm violations for the first time was less than budgeted. It was $9,725 less than budgeted. That's a very good thing. We didn't want to see that revenue continue to grow. We are still receiving revenue. We received $215,275 from those stop arm violations this year as people are driving around stop buses. But the good news is that it didn't substantially increase. The next line on this chart is use of fund balance. The budgeted fund balance here was $5.5 million. That included the original $450,000 that was in the FY24 approved budget, as well as the budget amendments that were approved by the school board in October and December. Those included funding one-time items like the bus routing software, the 2 replacement buses, turf for the baseball field, and a few other items. On this chart, we don't show that use of fund balance in this line, which allows us to see that overall then revenue was $4.2 million lower than budgeted. If we exclude that fund balance and look at the other categories of this chart, all of the other revenue categories were $1.3 million higher than budgeted. So that money is coming from other revenue that we just talked about, and then the other big categories is from state and federal. So when we look at our state revenue, it did come in $373,574 higher than we budgeted. Our final state aid was based on the final budget approved by the General Assembly and then the March 31st ADM. And our state aid was actually $521,811 higher than budgeted. But that was offset by sales tax that was $148,236 lower than budgeted. We received sales tax in school divisions based on statewide sales, and sales tax was actually 4.1% lower than budgeted and 5.6% lower than the prior year. When you look at federal revenue, we had a variance of $711,947, and that was primarily due to pandemic funding. So included in that excess was $497,984 for the Henderson HVAC replacement, nearly $90,000 in COVID testing reimbursements that we received, and another nearly $90,000 in other pandemic funding, including support for special education. The next line on the chart is our general government transfer. You also see a variance on that line of $54,539. That's because in addition to the general fund transfer, the general government provided us with pandemic funding that provided an English for speakers for other language teacher, a school counselor at the secondary campus, and psychology services. And the final actual expenditures for those was $54,000 lower than budgeted, so that's the variance there. When we move to the expenditure side of this chart, salaries for FY24 ended up being 1.4% or $527,560 lower than we had budgeted. That variance is just slightly larger than last year's variance of 1.3%. When we look at how that's made up, we actually underspent on regular salaries by about $560,000, and then we overspent on part-time salary substitutes and extra duty for extra activities by $32,907. When we look at benefits, overall we underspent benefits by 1.2% or $174,912. That variance was just slightly greater than our variance in the prior year of 0.5%. Benefits for us generally can be kind of difficult to forecast, primarily due to health, because employees can pick whatever health option fits them and their families best. So overall, when you look at benefits, that 1.2% is a combination of largely the biggest categories being FICA, health insurance, and retirement. If we look at all of the other columns on this chart and add them all together, our logistical expenditures, that's everything other than salaries and benefits, were $56,210 higher than we had budgeted. But let's kind of look at them by category. So contracted services were $378,000 or $169 or 9.8% higher than we had budgeted. That was primarily due to tuition expenditures to other jurisdictions and private schools being $354,000 higher than we had budgeted. The category of utilities, insurance, travel, and rental was $386,788 less than budgeted. The variance for that is primarily due to lower than budgeted expenditures for lease rental of equipment. And you can see that related to that, we have overspending in capital and capital replacements. And that's due to the capitalization of lease expenditures for things like copiers. So we had budgeted for them in equipment rental, but on this chart and in our financial statements, they're actually showing up in capital and capital replacements due to the fact that we're leasing our copiers. Materials and supplies were $65,754 higher than we budgeted. We had overspending on athletic supplies and textbooks that was underspent by some other educational supplies. When we look at the outstanding encumbrances for the year, you can see that column totals $1.2 million. That encumbrance carryover amount is lower than last year when it was $1.7 million. So an encumbrance is a purchase order or purchase commitment that we've made for a good or a service that's not yet received as of June 30th. And we look at what's making up that $1.2 million for FY24. The largest amount of that are the 2 buses that the board allowed us to purchase in December. So that's $955,000. That's actually 2 electric buses, the one from Don Beyer, and then the electric bus and the diesel bus that the school board approved in December. We have outstanding purchase orders for Convergent Technologies. They replaced the Bogan or the announcement system at the secondary campus over the summer, so that wasn't completed as of June 30th. That was nearly $100,000. We have funding to upgrade our door access system to align with the general government who replaced theirs. That's nearly $70,000. The bus routing software was also not complete as of June 30th, so that had nearly $60,000 in carryover. And then we had some smaller other items that get to that total difference of $1.2 million. So when we look overall at our revenue and expenditures, we started, and can we go to the chart on page 6? Thank you. Thank you. So if we look at the column on the far right, FY24, we started FY24 with $5,062,996 available in fund balance. And then we had been budgeting to use that $5.5 million of fund balance. But when we look what really happened, we used $1,386,692 of fund balance. We have to pay for those outstanding encumbrances that still remain. So when we take both of those into account, that leaves us with a fund balance of $2,628,617. From there, we have to fund the items we had included in our FY25 budget, which were $450,000 in our beginning balance. And then we also funded one-time positions in FY25 that were $364,290. So that brought our fund balance down to $1,620,089. Then we met with the general government at the Budget and Finance Committee meeting on Friday, and per our revenue sharing agreement, we would receive an additional $449,000 in one-time funding, which would bring the fund balance available for board priorities to $2,069,089. So that is the school operating fund. So if we could jump to the food service fund on page 7. Thank you. When we look at the school food service fund, overall in all of these categories, revenue for the food service fund totaled $1.4 million. When we look at revenue, we receive revenue from the federal government that supports students that are eligible for free and reduced price meals. We receive money for lunch sales. And when we look at our actual revenue for breakfast and lunch sales, it was $155,206 higher than we had budgeted. And then when you look at our federal revenue, it was $33,181 more than we had budgeted. Also on this chart, we're not showing any use in terms of fund balance. So you can see that that's also showing up as no expenditures there. So when we look overall at our revenue as compared to our budget was $787 difference. That is the smallest variance between revenue and budget that you generally will see. When we look at expenditures for the food service fund, our expenditures were 3.6% lower than budgeted, or overall $50,449 lower than we had budgeted. Of that, salaries were $29,030, or 5.1% higher than budgeted. And benefits, though, were $26,405, or 16.4% lower than we had budgeted. And that was primarily due to health costs for our food service employees being lower than we had budgeted based on people's health elections. When we look at all of our other expenditures, they were $53,073 lower than budgeted. That's due to primarily increased costs for food and supplies and equipment that was offset by our unspent contingency funds. So when we look at food service overall and we look at the impact of fund balance on the next slide. We'll go to page 9. One more. Thank you. When we look at food service started off the year with a fund balance of $795,694. It's important to note that food services fund balance is in excess of the 3 months of operating expenditures, which is the guideline that we received from the USDA. And we ended up with that higher than normal fund balance. Looking back, it was really due to the additional federal funding that we received when they were providing free meals for all students, and that had provided us with additional fund balance. So when you look at this current year, we actually added to our fund balance by that $48,895. They had outstanding encumbrances. Their actual fund balance at the end of FY24, they used that $46,712. They budgeted for $100,000 in fund balance for FY25, so they're at $746,772 in fund balance, which is still exceeding their 3 months operating expenditures, which is the goal.
So Richard, if you're listening at home, buy some equipment.
So Richard is going to buy some additional equipment, and then the other thing that Richard has already put into place is he's hired additional staffing for this year. I know he's very excited about his new employees, like couldn't be more excited. He's really working to ensure that they're having great quality control across all of our food kitchens, that the recipes are being followed faithfully, and that we're getting high quality food at all of our schools. So I think between the equipment and then the additional staff, he will reduce that fund balance. Fund balance in our food service fund is restricted, so it can't be used for any other purpose other than food service. But I know he'll be working to spend down that fund balance. So the last fund that I want to talk about is the Community Services Fund, which, John, that's on page 10. And the Community Services Fund, we're going to talk about kind of three distinct activities that are in this fund, and we'll look at fund balance that way. Community service has our daycare program included in it, our community use of our FCCPS facilities, and then also there's a small fund balance from the IB conference that we held last year that would carry over to a future IB conference. So that will be included in all of these numbers. So when we look at the Community Services Fund for revenue, our revenue totaled $2.3 million. That was $39,167 higher than we had budgeted. And again, that was due to fees for services being higher for all of the different programs. They too did not need to use any fund balances they had budgeted this year. And then when we look at expenditures for community services were $151,239, or 13.1% lower than they budgeted. And benefits were also $41,614, or 12.4% lower than budgeted. The important thing in terms of the Community Services Fund is their expenditures are directly tied to the revenue that they're bringing in, right? So daycare's hiring the number of staff people that they need to serve the number of students in their program, and the same with community use. Generally, the more community use we have, the more staff that we're hiring in terms of managing those activities. So on the next page, we have a fund balance chart that's a little bit of an eye test. So what we did in terms of one more. Yep, thank you. In terms of this chart, we broke it out a little bit differently. So on the far right in FY24, we started off with the available fund balance, and that was the available fund balance for all three of those program activities combined, right? So we started off, $1,137,604. And after all of the activity in FY24 and accounting for their encumbrances, their fund balance was $1,357,717. So when we look at where that fund balance is attributed to, the first section is the daycare program. That's the DC indication there. So you can see for this year, daycare added to their fund balance by $145,630. So daycare's fund balance is at $620,415. When we look at community use, they too added to their fund balance, and they went from $561,702 up to $730,888. And then lastly, that IB program that I talked about, they have a balance from the IB conference last year of $6,413. So each of those programs will be looking at needs within their programs in terms of coming up with possible budget amendments to bring back to the school board. So at the very end of this document, we have a list of one-time needs in terms of the operating funds that we talked about and the available fund balance there.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Michael. And I want to just, given the hour, I want to pose an opportunity here. Our hope this evening was that we could kind of walk through this list with all of you, but knowing that it's 10 o'clock, maybe I have another idea that I'll float to you. First of all, let me tell you where this list comes from. This list comes from our school-based administrators, some of our teacher leaders, and then our administrative team, thinking about some of the additional needs that we have that we could end up using some of our one-time funding on. There are a number of items in here specifically that are over $100,000, and those are sort of where our eyes take us to. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those real quick. First is textbook replacement, student desk and chair replacement, a marquee for the high school, ADA playground modification, gym lights with LED, finishing the stadium refurbishment, AKA the press box, a ticket booth, bus replacement. We did get a $400,000 grant for 2 new electric buses that we would need matching funds to exercise. vans for outplay students, and then there's one that's under 100,000 that I just wanted to highlight, and that is the possibility of partnering with the boosters to replace the the stadium scoreboard. And I know there's at least one person on the board that would be really excited about that. So knowing that we have some year-end balance, also knowing that based on the conversations that we've had with our general government partners and the city council that were at the budget finance meeting to us, that have indicated that they would be open to potentially funding another one of our projects because they are getting a lot more year-end balance than we're getting, and that's a function of the way that our revenue sharing agreement works. They got a lot of money through some interest-bearing accounts, and they, I dare say, are flush with cash. I don't want to say that, but I would say that there's a significant amount of money on the general government side of the ledger that they have offered up the opportunity to perhaps look at one of our projects that they would fund in addition to the revenue transfer that we are getting. So one would be general government, another would be our year end, and then we also have some community use funding, and I don't want to put the community use fund on the hook without having a conversation with them. But as I think about some of these bigger projects, there are some that might nicely fall into a partnership with the city. So one or two examples of those would be this: you all, along with the city, adopted the sustainability partnership that we have been trying to work towards as a city. So perhaps it would make sense for us to ask the general government to fund the other half of the 2 electric buses that we've gotten a grant for. Another opportunity of a partnership might be the rounding out of that press box at the high school. Their community use and their clubs and activities use our stadium a lot. They use that press box as well, and half of it's already been paid for out of the CIP from the schools. And so perhaps asking the general government to use some of their carryover to help us round out the difference would be useful for that. In that same vein, if one of those 2 didn't go through, and let's just say the general government said, we'll go ahead and fund, the buses, we might be able to use some community use funds perhaps for some of our field work, or some of the ADA playground modifications that we're making. So there are a number of pots of money that we may be able to utilize to fund some of these things on here. So what I thought I would do is, and this is somewhat a critical task in that, what is the deadline for us to have to make a decision about the buses, Ms. Michael?
So it's in November. Sunny Merriman had actually helped us with the application, so we're waiting for them to tell us the final date.
So we would just need to prioritize these year-end lists sometime between now and let's just say the end of October. And what I'd like to do is develop a tool where you, as board members, could vote up, if you will, those things that you see as those items that we should prioritize in order of need. We would do that as well, because we would really like to share with you what our thoughts are about what we think are most important, where the money could come from, and kind of give that to you, but then ask you to sort of churn through what we've given you and then kind of put your own spin on it. So creating a tool that puts all of these things in order and then asking you to just sort of prioritize might be a useful process. We could also add a column that could say where it could come from financially, whether it's from our year-end balance, maybe through a partnership with the general government, or through community use funds. The one thing we don't want to do in any of this is spend down our balance, right? That's our savings account. So when I think about the amount of money that we typically are, one, by policy, we're allowed to carry over roughly 2% of our year-end balance, or 2% of our operating budget in year-end balance, I mean to say. So that's about $1.6 million. So we really need to peel off $400,000 anyway. But I could see us in a scenario where we might spend $1 million of our $2 million, and then maybe some money from the general government, and then some money from our community use fund, where we might be able to get $2 million worth of projects done out of our collective year-end balance. So if that sounds like something we might want to consider, I'd be open to putting that tool together.
Tate. So
Yeah, Lori.
You think there's 2 million out of, you think there's about 2 million in this one-time funds?
We have $2 million total. I think.
Is that including what city's giving us? Is that like, what's the final
So
number,
our
you think?
our year-end balance in the schools is about $2 million. What is it, it's actually 2 point,
Including the funding from the general government, it's $2,069,089.
So call it $2 million.
That's 100% of it.
I think we have some money in community use funds. I don't know how much yet that we could spend. And I think we have some money that the general government has said we would be interested in funding a project for you. It's just determining which one that is. So
So why is the general government offering to fund a project for us?
they are offering to fund a project for us because in this round of revenue sharing, there was $5 million of revenue that was left over at year end on the general government side of the ledger. And the schools are getting $449,000 of that. And the reason that we're only getting $449,000 as opposed to half, which would be 2.5, is because the vast majority of their revenue that they grew over this last year came from interest accounts, and interest accounts are specifically excluded from the revenue sharing agreement. So because we're in this sort of imbalance, I think they're willing to look at bigger projects across the city, and since the schools are part of the city, they'd be open to helping us with a project.
So okay.
So I might suggest that we consider as one of those projects that we might ask them to pick up for us would either be the finishing out the press box, which is a $600,000 item, or helping us with the buses, which would be a $400,000.
And that's outside of the 449?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Now, I have heard from at least one city council member that they don't have any appetite to fund anything that has to do with the press box, but would be open to maybe thinking about something that builds on their sustainability plan. So, from a political lens, and I'll let you all do the calculus as the politicos, but it might be, from a political lens, worthy for us to consider doing the buses as opposed to the press box, and then we might be able to use some funds from our year end and some community service funds to finish out the press box.
Dollars are fungible.
Yes. So,
Quick thoughts about that proposal in terms of trying to help organize our thoughts? Seeing the thumbs up and head nods. Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, we'll put that together in kind of a Google form that will allow you guys to kind of move some things around, and then once you're set on sort of what your thoughts are, you can send them to us, and then we'll kind of amalgamate them and try to come up with a top list, and then we'll also share with you what our thoughts are.
That sounds great.
Because not everything on here is like critical. I just want to make sure
That was actually my question. I feel like the last time I saw this version, whatever, the last version of this, there was some degree of criticalness
Yeah.
associated. That would be helpful.
I think what I'd like to actually do, if you're okay with that, is give you some things that are above the line as opposed to below the line, and ask you to kind of organize those.
I would like your guidance.
Okay?
And then having the funding amounts so we know, because it sounds like we could fund a significant number of these items based on the funding that you've put together.
Correct.
Okay. That sounds great. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you very much for doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Might save some time, too.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, any other questions or thoughts for Ms. Michael on this? Okay. As always, Ms. Michael, we greatly appreciate the organization and the presentation and the explanation. So this is always a very appreciative part of understanding our function as overseeing the budget. So this is really helpful. Thank you very much.